The wind was a blade, honed on the jagged teeth of the mountains and driven into Alara's bones. It shrieked like a legion of tortured souls, tearing at the threadbare wool of her cloak and stealing the breath from her lungs before she could properly draw it. Each step was a battle fought in a war she was destined to lose, her worn-out boots sinking into the endless, blinding white of the snow. The world had been bleached of all color, leaving only the bruised iron gray of the sky and the punishing, pristine cruelty of the winter landscape. Beside her, a smaller, frilier form stumbled, and Alara's arm shot out, her own exhaustion a distant concern. Lily, her sister, was a pale ghost against the blizzard, her face a pinched mask of blue-tinged porcelain. Just a little farther, Alara lied, the words whipped away by the gale. She did not know if it was a little farther. She did not know anything except the gnawing cold and the crushing weight of the document folded in her bodice, a contract that felt more like a death sentence. They had called him the Beast of Obsidian Peak, a monster, a one-armed savage who lived in the godforsaken wilderness, shunned by decent folk. And Bartholomew Finch, with a smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes, had signed her over to this creature as one might dispose of unwanted livestock. It was a joke, he had explained to the sycophantic cronies gathered in his opulent office. A fine piece of frontier humor. The grieving, indebted widow, sent as a bride to the mountain man. He had laughed, a sound like coins spilling onto a coffin lid. The laughter had followed her out of the town of Providence, a chorus of mockery that echoed in the howl of the wind. Lily coughed, a dry, rattling sound that lanced through Alara's heart. The child was fading. They had been climbing for 2 days, following the crude map Finch had provided, a cruel jest in itself, with landmarks like Sorrowful Creek and Widow's Leap. Now the blizzard had descended, a physical manifestation of the despair that had clouded Alara's world since her husband, Thomas, had been brought back from the mine, broken and still. Finch owned the mine. Finch owned the debt. Finch owned the town. And now, he thought he owned her. A wave of dizziness washed over Alara. The hunger was a dull, constant ache, but the cold was an active predator, sinking its teeth deeper with every passing minute. She looked at Lily's face, at the ice forming in the fine, blonde hairs at her temples. Hope was a flickering ember, and the blizzard was doing its best to extinguish it entirely. She thought of Thomas, of his warm hands and easy smile, and a fresh wave of grief threatened to buckle her knees. He would have never let this happen. But he was gone, and she was left to face the wolves alone, both the two-legged and the four-legged kind. "I see it," Lily whispered, her voice a reedy rasp. Her small, mittened hand pointed a shaky finger upward. Alara squinted, her eyes watering from the wind's assault. Through the swirling chaos of snow, she saw it. A dark smudge against the uniform white, a plume of smoke, weak but persistent, struggling upward from a stone chimney. A cabin. It was real. The beast's lair. For a dizzying moment, relief and terror warred within her. They were not going to die on this mountain, not today. But what they would face inside that cabin was a terror of a different sort, a dread that had been festering in her mind for weeks. She tightened her grip on Lily's shoulder, a silent promise to protect her, though she had no idea how. With the last dregs of her strength, she pushed them forward, step by agonizing step, toward the smoke. Toward the man who was now, by a cruel twist of paper and fate, her husband, the one-armed monster of the mountain. The ground beneath the snow was uneven, a treacherous landscape of hidden rocks and roots. Her foot caught on something, and with a cry of surprise that was swallowed by the storm, she pitched forward, pulling Lily down with her into the soft, suffocating powder. For a long moment, she lay there, the world a silent, white blur. The will to rise, to fight, had vanished. It would be so easy to close her eyes, to let the cold sing its final lullaby. "Alara," Lily's voice was a pinprick of sound in the vast silence. "Get up." The child's command held a strength that shamed her. Alara pushed her hands into the snow, the bite of it a sharp reminder of her duty. She was not just Alara anymore. She was a shield. She was all that stood between her 10-year-old sister and the world's casual cruelty. She forced herself to her knees, then to her feet, hauling Lily up with her. The cabin was closer now, 100 yards at most. A lifetime away. They stumbled on, two wraiths adrift in a sea of white, their destination a haven and a horror all at once. The porch was a low, dark line. The door, a slab of heavy, unforgiving wood. Alara raised a hand, her knuckles numb and clumsy, and knocked. The sound was pathetic, absorbed by the storm. She knocked again, harder, using the heel of her hand, putting all her fear and desperation into the blows. The silence from within was more frightening than the storm outside. Had Finch sent them on a fool's errand? Was the cabin empty? Had the beast already perished, or simply moved on? The thought sent a fresh spear of panic through her. To have come this far, only to freeze to death on a monster's doorstep, seemed a final, fitting cruelty. She was about to turn away, to find some meager shelter against the cabin wall, when she heard it. A heavy, scraping sound. A bolt being drawn. The door swung inward, opening a sliver of darkness into the white maelstrom. A figure filled the space, a silhouette so large it seemed to block out what little light remained in the day. He was a mountain carved into the shape of a man, broad and impossibly tall. The air that rushed from the cabin was warm, thick with the scent of wood smoke and something else, something wild and musky, like pine needles and damp earth. Alara's gaze traveled up, past legs thick as tree trunks encased in buckskin, past a broad chest covered in a simple wool shirt, to his face. It was a landscape in itself, all harsh angles and shadowed plains, framed by a thick, untamed mane of dark hair and a beard that seemed to bristle with a life of its own. Scars crisscrossed the terrain of his face, a white line that bisected one eyebrow, a puckered mark on his jaw. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of a winter sky just before a storm, a piercing, pale gray that seemed to see right through her, stripping away the layers of her fear and grief to the raw, shivering core of her. And then she saw his left arm. The sleeve of his shirt was pinned up, empty below the shoulder. It was him. It was real. He said nothing. He simply stood there, a great, silent monolith, his gaze sweeping over her, then down to the small, trembling form of Lily huddled behind her skirts. His expression was unreadable, a mask of granite. Alara's throat was tight, her words frozen. She fumbled inside her cloak, her numb fingers struggling with the clasp of her dress. She pulled out the folded, slightly damp paper. The marriage contract. Her bill of sale. She held it out to him, her hand shaking so violently the paper rattled. I am Alara, she stammered, her voice thin and reedy against the wind's roar. Bartholomew Finch sent me. I am your wife. The man's eyes flickered from her face to the paper, then back again. A muscle worked in his jaw. For a terrifying moment, she thought he would laugh, a booming, monstrous sound that would seal their fate. Or worse, that he would simply close the door, leaving them to the mercy of the blizzard. He did neither. His single, massive hand reached out, not for the paper, but for her. Alara flinched, a small, involuntary gasp escaping her lips. But his hand was surprisingly gentle as it brushed past her, his fingers closing around the collar of Lily's thin coat. With an ease that was shocking, he lifted the child as if she weighed nothing at all and pulled her inside. Then, his gaze locked with hers, a silent command. He stepped back, holding the door open. The invitation was clear. Enter the beast's den, or perish in the storm. Choosing survival over fear, Alara stumbled over the threshold into the warmth. The heavy door boomed shut behind her, plunging the world into a sudden, shocking quiet. The shriek of the wind was gone, replaced by the crackle of a fire in a large stone hearth and the sound of her own ragged breathing. She stood there dripping, trembling, her back pressed against the wood, her eyes trying to adjust to the dim, firelit interior. The beast, her husband, had already crossed the single large room and was gently setting Lily down on a thick bear pelt near the fire. He knelt, his massive frame looming over the small girl, and with surprising dexterity, began to unfasten the toggles of her frozen coat. Jedediah Stone had not expected visitors. The mountain did not allow for them, especially not in the heart of a winter that had already claimed 3 unwary trappers in the lower valley. He had watched the sky darken for days, had felt the coming storm in the marrow of his bones, in the ache of the empty space where his arm used to be. He had laid in his supplies, secured his small world against the onslaught, and settled in for the long, solitary wait. Solitude was his companion, his armor, the state in which he had existed for so long he could scarcely remember any other. Then had come the knock. Faint, almost imagined, a fool's hope against the wind's fury. He had ignored it. But it came again, more insistent, a frantic, desperate drumming. No animal knocked. Curiosity, a long-dormant instinct, warred with his ingrained caution. When he opened the door, he expected a half-dead trapper, a lost prospector, someone whose face would be a mask of greed or desperation. He did not expect her. She was like a frozen dove, all wide, terrified blue eyes and a face so pale it seemed carved from the snow itself. She was beaten down by the storm, by life. He could see it in the slump of her shoulders, in the tremor that racked her thin frame. And behind her, peeking out, was a smaller version, a fledgling with the same frightened eyes. Then the woman had spoken, her voice a fragile thing, and held out a paper. Wife. The word hit him like a physical blow. He remembered the talk in Providence the last time he had gone for supplies, months ago. The whispers and snickers about the town's latest amusement, a cruel joke orchestrated by the snake, Bartholomew Finch. A mail-order bride for the one-armed monster. He had dismissed it as vicious gossip. He had been wrong. They had actually done it. The bastards. They had sent this woman, and a child, into the maw of the mountains, expecting them to be devoured, either by the winter or by him. A black, cold rage, an emotion he kept leashed and buried deep, began to stir. It was a fury directed not at the woman, but at the world that had cast her out. He saw the terror in her eyes as he reached for the child, the flinch as his hand came near. It was a familiar reaction. He was used to inspiring fear. But seeing it now, in this context, twisted something in his gut. He had pulled the little one inside, away from the clawing wind, and watched as the woman, his supposed wife, followed, her back pressing against the door as if she expected to be attacked. He ignored her for the moment, his attention focused on the child. Her skin was dangerously cold, her lips a faint shade of blue. He worked her out of the frozen coat, his fingers, thick and calloused, moving with a practiced gentleness he had once used for mending the broken wings of birds. He chafed her small, icy hands between his own large one, the friction creating a spark of warmth. The girl, Lily, watched him with wide, unblinking eyes, not with the terror her sister displayed, but with a strange, solemn curiosity. She did not cry or pull away. "Your feet," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, and used for days. The sound made Alara jump. He did not look at her, but kept his focus on Lily. "Take off her boots." The command broke Alara from her stupor. She moved stiffly, her limbs aching with the sudden shift in temperature. She knelt beside her sister on the thick, soft fur, her fingers fumbling with the frozen laces. The cabin was a single, large room, meticulously organized and surprisingly clean. Tools hung in neat rows on one wall, a testament to a life of self-sufficiency. A sturdy table and 2 chairs stood in the center. Shelves packed with jars of preserves lined another wall. It was a fortress of solitude, built by a man who expected no company, and they were an invasion. Once the boots were off, Jedediah examined the child's feet. They were red and cold, but not yet frostbitten. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. He stood, his shadow engulfing them, and moved to the hearth. He returned with a thick, clean wool blanket, wrapping it around Lily's small shoulders. Then he ladled something hot and fragrant from a pot, suspended over the fire, into a wooden bowl. He handed it to Alara. "Feed her," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. Slowly, Alara took the bowl. It was a simple, hearty stew of rabbit and root vegetables. The warmth seeped into her frozen fingers, and the savory aroma made her own stomach clench with a painful, violent hunger. She pushed it aside. Lily first. Always Lily first. She held a spoonful of the broth to her sister's lips. Lily sipped it, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment in pleasure. Alara continued to feed her, spoonful by spoonful, her movements mechanical. All the while, she was acutely aware of the man. He moved about the cabin with a quiet, powerful grace, a predator in his own territory. He did not seem hampered by his missing arm. His movements were economical and sure. He stoked the fire, checked the shutters, his presence a constant, massive weight in the small space. He was not what she had expected. The town had painted him as a slobbering, violent brute. He was violent, she had no doubt of that. The scars on his face and the raw power of his physique were a testament to a life of conflict. But there was a stillness about him, a control. And his treatment of Lily, it was not the act of a monster. It was gentle. This pivotal gentleness, so unexpected, was more disorienting than any overt threat would have been. It chipped away at the edges of her fear, leaving her confused and uncertain. After Lily had finished half the bowl and her color had returned, her eyelids drooping with warmth and exhaustion, Jedediah pointed to a small cot in the corner, piled high with furs. She sleeps there. Alara carefully helped Lily to the cot and tucked her in. The child was asleep almost instantly, her breathing deep and even. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alara knew her sister was safe. For now, she turned back to face her husband. He was standing by the fire, his single hand resting on the stone mantelpiece. The firelight carved deep shadows on his face, making him look ancient and formidable, like a pagan god of the wilderness. He held the other half of the stew out to her. "Eat," he said. It was not a request. Her hunger was a ravenous beast now, clawing at her insides. She took the bowl, her hands still shaking, and sat on one of the hard wooden chairs at the table. She ate, forcing herself to go slowly, not to devour the food like a starving animal, though that is what she felt like. He did not join her. He stood by the fire, watching the storm rage outside the small, shuttered window, granting her a small measure of privacy for which she was grateful. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant, muffled howl of the wind. When she was finished, she placed the bowl on the table, her strength somewhat restored. The warmth and food had chased away the immediate threat of freezing, but the underlying terror remained. She was trapped in a cabin, in the middle of a blizzard, with a complete stranger. A dangerous stranger to whom she was legally bound. "Finch," he said, his back still to her. The name was a curse on his lips. "He has the deed to your land." It was not a question. Alara flinched. "My husband's land," she corrected, her voice stronger now. "Thomas borrowed money against it. For the new mine shaft. He said it was a sure thing." "There are no sure things with Finch," Jedediah rumbled. "Except that the house always wins." He turned from the fire, his gray eyes pinning her in place. "He told you I sent for a bride." Alara shook her head, her throat dry. "No," he said, "it was an arrangement. To clear the debt. He said you were a lonely man. That you needed a wife to keep your home." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. It was what Finch had told her to say, the flimsy story meant to cover his cruelty. Jedediah gave a short, harsh laugh that held no humor. It was a sound like rocks grinding together. "A keeper of my home," he repeated, the words laced with a bitter irony. He gestured around the Spartan, orderly cabin with his hand. "I seem to have managed well enough." "No, woman. He sent you here to die, or to come crawling back to him, broken and begging for his mercy. He gets your land either way, and he gets his sport." His words were brutal, but they were the truth. A truth she had known in her heart, but had not dared to voice. Hearing it spoken aloud in this quiet, warm place was like having a wound lanced. Painful, but necessary. The flimsy pretense was stripped away, leaving only the stark reality of their situation. "Why?" she whispered, the question encompassing everything. Why would Finch be so cruel? Why had he sent her here? Why had this man, this stranger, taken them in? "Because men like Finch feed on the weakness of others. It is their bread and their wine," he said, his voice dropping low. He took a step toward her, and she fought the instinct to shrink back. "And I took you in because only a monster leaves a woman and a child to die in a storm." His eyes bored into hers, and in their depths, she saw not the savagery the townspeople spoke of, but a profound and ancient weariness. And something else, a flicker of shared understanding. He, too, was an outcast. He, too, had been judged and condemned by the world below. He stopped before her, looming, but not menacing. "You are not my wife," he stated, his voice flat and final. "That piece of paper is a lie written by a villain. You are a guest in my home. You and the child. When the storm breaks and the pass is clear, you are free to go." Relief washed over her so intensely her knees felt weak. She was not his prisoner. She was not bound to this giant, silent man. But the relief was immediately followed by a new, colder dread. Go where? Back to Providence? Back to Finch? They had nothing. No money, no home, no allies. Going back was a death sentence of a different kind. The wilderness in front of her was terrifying, but the civilized world behind her was a place of calculated, patient cruelty. There is nowhere for us to go, she said, the admission a quiet surrender. Jedediah's expression did not change, but a flicker of something, pity, frustration, crossed his features. He looked from her to the sleeping form of Lily on the cot. He ran his hand over his beard, a rough, scraping sound. Then you will stay, he said, as if deciding the fate of a stray animal. Until the spring. The storm will last for days. We will speak of it no more until then. He turned away from her then, his social obligations fulfilled. He took a log from the pile by the hearth and placed it on the fire, sending a shower of orange sparks up the chimney. He was dismissing her, returning to his world of silence and solitude. Alara sat at the table, the warmth of the cabin a strange contrast to the icy turmoil in her heart. She was safe, for now. She had a roof over her head and a full belly. But she had traded one gilded cage for a rustic one, her fate now in the hands of a man who was as wild and unpredictable as the mountains he called home. As she watched his broad back, the stark reality of his missing arm, the sheer, imposing power of him, she wondered if she had escaped the devil only to be trapped with a beast. But the beast had shown her sister kindness. The beast had given her food and shelter. The beast had spoken the truth when all she had heard for months were lies. And in the heart of the raging blizzard, that small, confusing kernel of decency was the only thing she had to cling to. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended reality. The blizzard did not abate. It raged with a relentless fury, sealing the cabin in a cocoon of white. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only the single room, the howl of the wind, the crackle of the fire, and the three of them, orbiting each other in a careful, silent dance. Jedediah was a creature of routine. He rose before the first hint of dawn, his movements quiet and efficient as he stoked the fire back to life. He would spend hours at the sturdy table, mending harnesses, sharpening knives with a whetstone, or carving intricate animals from scraps of wood with a small, wickedly sharp blade. He worked with a focused intensity that seemed to shut out the world, his single hand performing tasks that should have required two with an unhurried, practiced grace. Alara found her own rhythm. She kept the cabin tidy, cooked their meager meals from his well-stocked larder, and mended their clothes. It was a strange parody of domestic life, a pantomime of the marriage that he had so bluntly rejected. They rarely spoke. The silence in the cabin was a living thing, thick and heavy, but it was not entirely uncomfortable. It was the silence of the mountains, of deep woods and vast, empty spaces. A silence he was accustomed to, and one she was learning to navigate. She learned to read him by his movements, by the set of his jaw, by the way his eyes would occasionally drift to the shuttered window. It was Lily who bridged the chasm between them. Children, with their lack of pretense, often see what adults miss. She was not afraid of Jedediah. After her initial recovery, her solemn curiosity had blossomed. She would sit on the bare pelt by the fire, watching him work for hours, her chin propped on her hands. He, in turn, seemed to ignore her, but Alara noticed he always sat in a way that she could see his hands. One afternoon, he finished carving a small, detailed figure of a wolf. He inspected it, turning it over and over. Then, without a word, he tossed it onto the pelt near Lily's knee. Lily picked it up, her small fingers tracing the delicate lines of the carving. She looked from the wolf to his face, a silent question in her eyes. Jedediah grunted, a noncommittal sound, and turned back to sharpening a large skinning knife, but Alara saw the corner of his mouth twitch almost imperceptibly. From then on, a small wooden animal appeared on the rug every day. A bear, a deer, an eagle with outstretched wings. Lily arranged them in a silent menagerie by the hearth, her most prized possessions. The pivotal moment, the act that truly shattered the wall of Alara's fear, came on the third day. She was fetching a pail of snow from the porch to melt for water. The wind had died down slightly, but the cold was still a physical blow. As she turned to come back inside, her foot slipped on a patch of ice hidden beneath the fresh powder. The pail went flying, and she fell hard, her head striking the corner of a wooden crate with a sickening crack. The world exploded in a flash of white, then faded to a dull, throbbing gray. She lay there, dazed, the snow cold against her cheek, a warm trickle of blood matting her hair. The cabin door was thrown open. Jedediah filled the frame, his face a thunderous mask. He was across the small porch in a single stride, kneeling beside her. She expected him to be rough, to haul her up like a sack of grain. Instead, his hand, that one massive, calloused hand, came to her head, his touch surprisingly, astonishingly gentle. His fingers probed the wound with the delicacy of a surgeon, his touch light and careful. "Do not move," he commanded, his voice a low rumble, but it held a note of something she had not heard before. Concern. He disappeared back into the cabin and returned a moment later with a clean cloth and a small tin. With infinite care, he scooped her into his arms. The strength of his single arm was terrifying. He lifted her as easily as he had lifted Lily, holding her against his solid chest. He carried her inside and deposited her on the chair at the table as if she were made of fine porcelain. Alara sat, dizzy and trembling, as he stood before her, dabbing at the cut on her scalp. His brow was furrowed in concentration, his gray eyes focused intently on his task. He smelled of pine smoke, leather, and the clean, sharp scent of the cold. In that moment, so close to him, she was not afraid. The beast had vanished, replaced by a man. A quiet, competent man who was tending her injury with a tenderness she had not known since her father had patched her scraped knees as a child. He finished cleaning the wound and applied a foul-smelling but strangely soothing salve from the tin. "It is not deep," he announced, "but you will have a headache." He looked at her, his gaze holding hers for a long moment. "You must be more careful. This mountain does not forgive foolishness." "It was not foolishness," she retorted, a spark of defiance rising through the pain. "It was an accident." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "On this mountain," he said softly, "there is no difference." That night, as the storm finally began to exhaust itself, the wind's howl softening to a mournful sigh, the silence in the cabin felt different. It was less a void and more a shared space. Lily was asleep, her menagerie of wooden animals standing guard. Alara was mending a tear in Lily's dress by the firelight. Jedediah sat across from her, cleaning his rifle, the soft clicks and scrapes of metal on metal a strangely comforting sound. "Why did you come to this place?" Alara asked, her voice quiet in the stillness. She was not sure where the question came from, but it felt important. She needed to understand the man who held their lives in his hand. He paused in his work, setting a small pin on a piece of oiled cloth. He stared into the fire for a long time, the flames dancing in his gray eyes. She thought he would not answer. "The world below has too many people," he said at last. "Too many rules not of my own making. Too many memories. And the mountain is better. The mountain is honest," he rumbled. "It will kill you, but it will not lie to you about it." He picked up the rifle barrel, sighting down its length. "And my arm?" he asked, anticipating her next, unspoken question. "The people in Providence tell stories. That I fought a demon. That I was punished by God. That I lost it in a drunken brawl. They said it was a bear," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "It was. A grizzly. A mother with cubs. A trapper I was with was a fool. Got between them. I got between the bear and the fool." He looked down at his empty sleeve, his expression distant. "The fool ran. The bear stayed. I kept my life. She kept my arm. A fair trade, I suppose." He spoke of it with a flat, emotionless finality, as if recounting a business transaction. But Alara could see the phantom pain in the clenching of his jaw, the deep-seated trauma that had driven him to this self-imposed exile. She felt a sudden, fierce urge to offer him some comfort, but she did not know how. Instead, she offered him a piece of her own brokenness. "My husband, Thomas," she began, her voice catching. "Finch said it was a mining accident." A support beam collapsed. She looked up from her sewing, meeting his steady gaze. "But the foreman, a kind man, he told me later. The beam was sawed halfway through. It was not an accident. Finch wanted the land. Thomas was just in the way." The confession hung in the air between them, a small, ugly stone of truth. She had never spoken it aloud to anyone. Jedediah stopped his work. He laid the rifle parts down and gave her his full attention. He did not offer empty platitudes or condolences. He simply listened, his silence a vessel for her grief and rage. In his scarred, weathered face, she saw not pity, but a reflection of her own pain. He understood. He knew what it was to be wronged by the world, to carry wounds both visible and invisible. He was a good man, she finished, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. He did not deserve to die in the dark, for nothing. No, Jedediah agreed, his voice a low, dark growl. He did not. In that moment, a bond was forged between them, silent and unspoken. It was a bond of shared trauma, of mutual survival in a world that had tried to crush them both. They were two broken things, cast out and left for dead, who had found a strange, reluctant solace in a snowbound cabin on the edge of the world. He was still a stranger, a man of immense and dangerous power. But he was no longer a monster. He was Jedediah, and for the first time, Alara did not feel like his prisoner. She felt, in a way she could not quite explain, that she had come home. They settled into a new routine, one born of this fragile, nascent trust. The domestic tasks that had once been a silent pantomime became a quiet partnership. When she struggled to haul the heavy buckets of water from the well he had dug near the cabin, he would appear without a word and take them from her, his one arm managing the two buckets with an ease that belied their weight. She, in turn, learned the art of baking bread in the cast-iron Dutch oven by the hearth, and the scent of it, warm and wholesome, filled the cabin, a scent of home that slowly began to chase away the lingering ghosts of fear and solitude. He showed her how to set snares for rabbits and ptarmigan near the cabin, his large hand guiding hers as he demonstrated how to tie the intricate knots. His touch was impersonal, instructive, yet a jolt of awareness shot through her each time his fingers brushed against hers. His bond with Lily deepened. He never spoke to the child in anything more than monosyllables, but he communicated in a language she seemed to instinctively understand. He taught her the tracks of the animals that ventured near the cabin, the delicate print of the snowshoe hare, the heart-shaped hoof-print of the deer, the menacing pad of the wolf. He carved her a small, functional bow and a set of blunt-tipped arrows, and spent an afternoon patiently showing her how to hold it, how to draw the string, his massive frame a shield against the wind as he corrected her stance. Alara watched them from the cabin doorway, a strange, tight feeling in her chest. Seeing this giant, scarred man, this feared outcast, treating her sister with such patient care, awakened a warmth in her that had been dormant for a very long time. He was not just protecting them, he was nurturing them. He was giving Lily back a piece of the childhood that Finch's cruelty had threatened to steal. One evening, after Lily was asleep, Alara found Jedediah sitting at the table, a map spread out before him. It was a detailed, hand-drawn map of the mountain range, filled with his own notes and markings. He was tracing a route with his finger, his brow furrowed. "What is it?" she asked, approaching the table. "The spring thaw," he said without looking up. "When it comes, the South Pass will be the first to open. It leads down toward the flatlands, away from Providence. There's a settlement there, a new one. Fortitude. You could start over there. No one would know you." He was planning their escape. The thought should have brought relief, but instead, a cold knot formed in her stomach. The idea of leaving this cabin, of leaving him, was suddenly a terrifying prospect. This place, which had once been her prison, had become a sanctuary, and this man, who had been her captor, had become her protector. "And what of you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He finally looked up, his gray eyes unreadable. "I will remain. This is my home." He said it as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He was a creature of the mountain. He did not belong in the world below, and he knew it. He was giving her a way out, a path back to the life she had lost. But the life she had known was gone. Thomas was gone. Their small farm was in the hands of a murderer. The world he was offering her felt empty, a pale imitation of what she was beginning to find here. Before she could find the words to express the confusing torrent of emotions inside her, there was a sound from outside. A low, guttural howl, closer than the wind. Jedediah was on his feet in an instant, his head cocked, listening. He moved to the door and pressed his ear against the heavy wood. Another howl answered the first, this one from a different direction. "Wolves," he said, his voice a low growl. "A big pack. They're hungry. The storm has driven the deer to lower ground. Alara's blood ran cold. She had heard stories of wolf packs, driven mad by starvation, attacking travelers, even trying to break into cabins. Are we safe? She asked. The cabin is strong, he said, moving to the shuttered window and peering through a small crack. But they are bold. He was silent for a moment. They have something cornered. Down by the creek. A sharp, bleeding cry of terror cut through the night, followed by a cacophony of snarling and snapping. Alara's heart leaped into her throat. It was a doe. She had seen it that morning, a beautiful, graceful creature picking its way through the snowdrifts. Jedediah grabbed his rifle from its pegs on the wall. He checked the load with a swift, practiced motion. Stay inside. Bar the door behind me. Do not open it for any reason until I return, he commanded, his voice hard and absolute. You can't go out there, she cried, grabbing his arm, his only arm, without thinking. The muscle beneath her fingers was like granite. There are too many of them. He looked down at her hand, then up to her face. His expression was stern, but his eyes softened for a fraction of a second. Everything on this mountain has a right to fight for its life, he said. I am not a man who stands by and watches a slaughter. He gently removed her hand from his arm. Bar the door. Before she could protest further, he was gone, slipping out into the moonlit, snow-covered landscape as silently as a shadow. Alara rushed to the door, her heart pounding, and slid the heavy wooden bar into place. She ran to the window, peering through the crack. The scene below was one of primal, savage beauty. The moon was high and bright, casting the world in stark relief of black and silver. The wolf pack, a dozen or more dark shapes, had a young doe cornered in a small clearing. They were circling, lunging, their movements a fluid, deadly dance. Then Jedediah was there. He did not rush in. He moved along the edge of the trees, a dark, powerful figure, his rifle held at the ready. He was one man, with one arm, against a dozen hungry predators. It was suicide. The lead wolf, a massive brute with a graying muzzle, broke from the pack and launched itself at the doe's throat. A single, deafening crack echoed through the silent woods. The wolf yelped and fell, a dark stain spreading on the snow beneath it. The pack froze, momentarily confused. Jedediah used the moment to reload, a process that was a marvel of efficiency. He worked the lever, ejected the spent cartridge, and slotted a new one into the chamber with a speed that seemed impossible for one hand. He was not aiming for the pack. He was aiming for the alpha. He fired again, not at another wolf, but into the snowbank just in front of the new leader who had stepped forward. The snow exploded. It was a warning, a declaration. The wolves were not fools. They had lost their leader, and this new threat was unlike any they had encountered. This was not prey. This was a competitor, a more dangerous apex predator. With a low whine, the pack began to melt back into the shadows of the forest, leaving their fallen leader behind. The doe, trembling but unharmed, bolted in the opposite direction, a fleeting brown shape against the white. Jedediah stood for a long moment, watching the forest, his rifle still ready. He was the master of his domain, a solitary king who had just enforced the laws of his kingdom. He turned and began the walk back to the cabin, his boots crunching in the snow. Alara fumbled with the bar, her hands shaking, and threw the door open as he reached the porch. He stepped inside, bringing the sharp, clean scent of cold and gunpowder with him. He did not look at her. He went straight to the rifle pegs, hung the weapon in its place, and began to remove his snow-covered outer garments. You were magnificent, she breathed, the words coming out before she could stop them. He paused, his back to her. I was protecting my territory, he grumbled, but there was no heat in it. It was more than that, she insisted, stepping closer. You could have been killed. You risked your life for a deer. He finally turned to face her, his expression serious. I risked my life to show you something, he said, his voice low and intense. That you do not stand by while the strong devour the weak. That you do not let bullies and predators win. Not Finch. Not a wolf pack. You stand. You fight. He tapped his own chest with his finger. Even if you are outnumbered. Even if you are incomplete. You fight. His words struck her with the force of a physical blow. He had not just been saving a deer. He had been teaching her a lesson. He was showing her the code he lived by, the code that the mountain had taught him. And he was trying to pass it on to her. He was trying to forge her fear into a weapon. "I don't know how to fight," she whispered, the admission a painful one. "I will teach you," he said simply. The next morning, he took her to a clearing a short distance from the cabin. The air was crisp and cold, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. He carried a second rifle, a smaller, lighter Winchester that he pulled from a long-forgotten chest. He set up a series of tin cans on a fallen log. "This is your weapon," he said, handing her the rifle. It was heavy, and the cold metal leached the warmth from her hands. "It is not a toy. It is a tool. It has one purpose. Respect it. Understand it." For the next hour, he drilled her in the fundamentals: how to hold the rifle, how to brace it against her shoulder, how to sight down the barrel, aligning the front and rear sights, how to breathe, exhale slowly, and squeeze the trigger, not pull it. Her first shot went wide, the recoil slamming into her shoulder and startling her. The noise was deafening. "Again," was all he said. She fired again and again. She missed every time. Her shoulder ached. Her ears were ringing. Frustration began to build. "I can't do this," she said, lowering the rifle. He stepped behind her. He did not touch her, but his presence was a warm, solid wall at her back. "You are thinking about the target," he said, his voice a low rumble near her ear. "Do not think about the target. Think about this." He tapped the rifle stock. "Think about your breathing. Think about the trigger. The target is not important. The process is everything. The world is full of distractions. The noise, the recoil, the fear. You must find the stillness inside the storm. Focus. Breathe. Squeeze." She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, the scent of him, of pine and wood smoke, filling her senses. She opened them, raised the rifle again, and did exactly as he said. She blocked out the world, focused on the simple, mechanical process. She aligned the sights, let out half a breath, and squeezed the trigger. A tin can flew off the log with a satisfying ping. A slow smile spread across her face. She turned to him, her eyes shining. "I did it. I know," he said. The corner of his mouth twitched in that almost smile. Again, they spent every day that week in the clearing. He was a patient, demanding teacher. He taught her to load, fire, and reload until the motions were second nature. He taught her to track, to read the signs of the forest. He was not just teaching her to shoot. He was teaching her to survive. He was giving her the tools to be a predator, not prey. And with each lesson, with each small victory, she felt a strength she had never known growing within her. The grieving, helpless widow that had stumbled up this mountain was slowly being burned away, reforged in the crucible of the wilderness into something harder, something stronger, something new. The thaw came slowly, then all at once. The constant drip of melting snow from the eaves became a steady rhythm, a clock counting down their remaining time together. The sun felt warmer, the days longer. The South Pass would be clear soon. The time for decisions was upon them. The unspoken tension returned to the cabin, thicker than ever before. Alara found herself making excuses to be near Jedediah, finding small tasks that required his help. She was terrified of the conversation she knew they had to have, terrified of the answer he might give. The warning came on a bright, clear afternoon. A lone figure on horseback was picking his way up the trail. It was not a path many traveled. Jedediah saw him first, his body going rigid as he stared down the mountain from the cabin's porch. "Get inside," he said, his voice flat and cold. "Take Lily to the loft. Stay there. Do not make a sound." "Who is it?" Alara asked, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. "Trouble," was his only reply. She did as she was told, her newfound courage faltering in the face of his grim certainty. She hustled a confused Lily up the short ladder to the small sleeping loft, pulling the ladder up behind her. She peered down through a crack in the floorboards. Jedediah stood in the center of the cabin, his rifle cradled in the crook of his arm, a silent, waiting sentinel. The rider dismounted in front of the cabin. It was Dr. Albright, the old, weary physician from Providence. He was a kind man who had tended to Thomas in his final hours, his face a mask of helpless sorrow. Jedediah opened the door before he could knock. "Albright," Jedediah greeted him, his voice devoid of warmth. "You are a long way from your leeches and potions." "I had to come, Jedediah," the doctor said, his voice breathless from the altitude and the urgency of his mission. "I'm a fool for it. But my conscience would allow nothing less. He glanced around nervously, as if expecting to see ghosts. Is the woman, are they here? They are, Jedediah said. And they are under my protection. You can tell your master that. My master? Albright scoffed, a flicker of his old pride showing. Finch is no master of mine. He is a sickness, a plague upon this town. And he is coming, Jedediah. Alara's blood ran cold. She pressed her eye tighter to the crack. He's not coming for the woman, not directly. The doctor continued, wringing his hands. He's past that. His pride was wounded, you see. The whole town knows he sent her here as a joke, and you took her in. You made him a laughingstock. A man like Finch cannot abide that. Albright took a deep breath. He's found a loophole in the original survey of this territory. Hired a judge from 3 counties over. He has a paper, a warrant, that says this land, this whole mountain, is his. He's coming to evict you. He's deputized a dozen of the worst cutthroats and hired guns he could find. He's not coming to talk, Jedediah. He's coming to wipe you off this mountain. Jedediah was silent for a long moment, his face carved from stone. When? Soon, Albright said, his voice dropping to a whisper. A day? 2 at most. They're just waiting for the North Pass to be clear enough for a large party. He means to kill you, Jedediah, and the woman and child. He said they'd be witnesses who got caught in the crossfire. An unfortunate tragedy. The doctor's face was pale. I have to go. If they know I came here. Get them out, Jedediah. Take them and run. There's no shame in it. There is no shame in it, Jedediah repeated, his voice a low growl. But there is no honor in it, either. This is my home. You have done a brave thing, Albright. Now go, before the sickness finds you too. The doctor nodded, his face a mixture of fear and relief. He turned and practically ran to his horse, mounting it with a clumsy haste and spurring it back down the mountain without a backward glance. Jedediah barred the door and turned, his gray eyes finding the crack in the loft floorboards, finding her. He knew she had been listening. Come down, he said. She lowered the ladder and descended, her legs unsteady. Lily remained in the loft, her face a small, pale moon in the shadows. Alara faced him in the center of the room. The time for games, for unspoken truths, was over. You heard him, Jedediah stated. You must take the child and go. Now, take the South Pass. Do not stop until you reach Fortitude. No, she said, the word small but firm. He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. This is not a discussion. This is my land, my fight. It does not concern you. It concerns me, she retorted, her voice rising, filled with a fire he had never heard before. Bartholomew Finch murdered my husband. He tried to destroy my life, my sister's life. He sent me here to die. You think that doesn't concern me? You taught me how to fight. You told me you do not stand by while predators win. Are you a hypocrite, Jedediah Stone? His jaw tightened, a muscle working furiously. This is not a wolf pack, woman. This is a dozen men with guns and a piece of paper that says they are the law. I do not care what their paper says, she shot back, stepping closer to him until she had to crane her neck to look up into his face. You said this is your home. Well, for the past 2 months, it has been my home, too. It is the only home Lily and I have. You think I will let him take this from us? After he has taken everything else? You think I will run and hide while you die for us? She could see the internal battle raging in his eyes. The solitary hunter, the man who relied on no one, was at war with the protector, the man who had let them into his heart, even if he would not admit it. I will not run, she said, her voice softening, but losing none of its resolve. I will not leave you. We will face him together, or we will die together. The choice is yours. But Lily and I, we are staying. For a long, breathless moment, he stared down at her. The woman who stood before him was not the terrified, frozen creature who had collapsed on his doorstep. This was a warrior, a woman forged in fire and ice, a woman who looked at him not with fear, but with a fierce, unwavering loyalty, a woman who was willing to stand with him against the world. He had tried to teach her to be strong, and he had succeeded beyond his wildest imaginings. She was magnificent, and in that moment, he knew he was lost. The solitude he had cultivated for years had been shattered, and he did not want it back. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. The gesture was so full of tenderness it made her gasp. You are a fool, Alara, he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she could not name. Then I am a fool with good company, she whispered back, leaning into his touch. A grim smile touched his lips. All right, he said. The word is surrender and a vow. We stay, we fight. The day that followed was a whirlwind of grim preparation. The cabin, once a haven of peace, was transformed into a fortress. Jedediah was a force of nature, his every movement precise and purposeful. He and Alara worked in a seamless, unspoken partnership. They barred the windows not with the simple shutters, but with heavy planks of wood he had stored for repairs, leaving only small, narrow slits for firing. They brought the rest of the firewood inside, stacking it against the walls to provide extra cover. They filled every bucket and pot with water. Jedediah laid out his arsenal on the table. His own powerful rifle, the smaller Winchester he had taught her to use, a heavy Colt revolver, and a wicked-looking Bowie knife with a blade nearly a foot long. He checked each weapon, his movements economical and deadly. He handed Alara the Winchester. You will stay in the loft, he commanded. The angle is good. You can cover the front and the west side. Do not fire unless you have a clear shot. Do not fire to scare them. If you pull that trigger, you pull it to end a threat. Do you understand? I understand, she said, her voice steady, her hands gripping the rifle with a newfound familiarity. It was no longer a foreign object, but an extension of her will. He looked at her, his eyes searching her face. Are you afraid? Terrified, she admitted honestly. But I am more afraid of what happens if we lose. He nodded, a look of grim approval on his face. He then turned his attention to Lily. He knelt before her, his large frame making him seem even bigger next to her small form. Lily, he said gently, I need you to be the bravest of all. I need you to go to the root cellar. You will take a lantern and a blanket. You will stay there, no matter what you hear. Do you understand me? It is the most important job of all. Lily looked from his face to her sister's, her lower lip trembling. But she nodded, her eyes wide and serious. She knew this was not a game. Alara hugged her sister tightly. I love you, she whispered. Be brave. She led Lily to the trapdoor in the floor, hidden beneath the bare pelt, and helped her down into the small, dark space below, handing her the lit lantern. She closed the heavy door, her heart aching. As dusk began to settle, casting long, purple shadows across the snow, they took their positions. Alara climbed into the loft, the Winchester feeling cold and solid in her hands. Jedediah stood by the main door, his own rifle at the ready, a dark, immovable silhouette against the dying light. The cabin was silent, save for the sound of their breathing. It was the tense, heavy quiet before a storm. They came just after dawn. A line of dark figures on horseback, stark against the pink and gold of the sunrise. There were more than a dozen of them, rough men with hard faces, led by a man in a fine fur coat, riding a magnificent black stallion. Bartholomew Finch. He rode as if he owned the mountain already. They stopped 100 yards from the cabin, a safe distance. Jedediah Stone. Finch's voice, amplified by the crisp morning air, was arrogant and condescending. You are trespassing on my property. I have a legal warrant for your removal. Come out now, with your hands empty, and you will not be harmed. Jedediah did not answer. He remained motionless, a predator waiting for the prey to make a mistake. Have it your way, you one-armed freak. Finch screamed, his civilized veneer cracking already. Burn him out. One of the riders dismounted, a torch in his hand. He had a flask in his other hand and was dousing the torch with oil. He laughed, a cruel, ugly sound, and began to run toward the cabin. Alara's heart pounded in her chest. She raised the Winchester, her hands sweating. She put the running man in her sights, just as Jedediah had taught her. Find the stillness. Breathe. Squeeze. The man was a monster, coming to burn her home, to kill the man who had saved her, to orphan her sister. He was a threat. Before she could fire, a single shot rang out from below. The man with the torch screamed and crumpled to the ground, clutching his leg. He had not been killed, but he was out of the fight. A deliberate, calculated shot. Jedediah was a master of his craft. Chaos erupted. The hired guns, no longer confident in an easy victory, took cover behind trees and rocks, and the air was filled with the crack of rifle fire. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, splintering the wood, showering the interior with debris. Alara flattened herself on the floor of the loft, the noise a deafening roar. Jedediah returned fire, not in a panicked volley, but with single, well-aimed shots. Each shot was answered by a cry of pain or a sudden silence from one of the attackers. He was a one-man army, his movements fluid and deadly. Alara knew she had to act. She crawled to her firing slit. She could see two men trying to sneak around the west side of the cabin to get a clear shot at the back door. They were using a large boulder for cover. She rested the barrel of the Winchester on the edge of the slit, her heart hammering. They were Finch's men. They had come to murder them. They were part of the sickness. She waited for one of them to expose himself. He peered out from behind the rock, raising his rifle. She fired. The recoil was a familiar jolt. The man's head snapped back, and he fell, his rifle clattering on the rocks. The second man, startled, stood up to run. A second shot from Jedediah's rifle took him down. Jedediah glanced up at the loft, a quick, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Pride surged through Alara, hot and fierce. She was not a victim. She was a defender. She was part of this fight. She reloaded, her hands moving with a sureness she would not have thought possible weeks ago. The siege wore on. The sun climbed higher in the sky. The initial barrage had faltered into a waiting game. Jedediah and Alara had the advantage of cover, but they were outnumbered and surrounded. Finch's men were growing impatient. Then, they tried a new tactic. A group of them charged the front door, using a heavy log as a battering ram. Crunch. The heavy oak door shuddered, the bar groaning in protest. Again, a voice shouted from outside. Crunch. A crack appeared in the door. Jedediah moved away from the door, taking cover behind the overturned table. Alara. The door, he yelled. She knew what she had to do. The men were clustered together, their focus on the door. They were a perfect target. She scrambled to the front of the loft, aimed through the slit above the door, and fired into the group. One man fell. She fired again. Another. They scattered, abandoning the log, firing wildly at the loft. Wood splinters flew past her face, one grazing her cheek, drawing blood. She ignored the sting. She was a cornered grizzly now, fighting for her cub. Suddenly, a new, more terrifying sound reached her. A crackling, and the smell of smoke. Not wood smoke. Something acrid and chemical. They had managed to get to the back of the cabin. They had started a fire. The one thing Jedediah could not fight with a bullet. The fire, she screamed. Jedediah cursed, a rare show of emotion. The back wall, the one with no firing slits, was beginning to smolder. The smoke thickened, filling the cabin, making their eyes water. They were being cooked alive. We have to go out, Jedediah said, his voice grim. It's our only chance. I will go first. Draw their fire. You take the west side. Run for the trees. Do not look back. No, she cried, scrambling down the ladder. I told you, we do this together. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his one hand strong and firm. Alara, listen to me. You can make it. You are fast. Live. For Lily. He was going to sacrifice himself. He was going to die for them. She looked into his smoke-stained face, into his fierce, desperate gray eyes, and she saw not a monster or a savage, but the bravest, most honorable man she had ever known. And she loved him. The realization was as clear and as painful as a shard of glass in her heart. I love you, she said, the words tumbling out, raw and unplanned. His eyes widened, his grip on her shoulders loosening in surprise. For a moment, the sounds of the fire and the guns faded away. There was only the two of them, in a world of smoke and chaos. Before he could respond, the front door, weakened by the battering ram and the fire, finally gave way. It burst inward with a splintering crash. And there, framed in the doorway, his face a mask of triumphant fury, was Bartholomew Finch. He held a fancy, silver-plated pistol in his hand. Behind him, his remaining men fanned out. It's over, beast, Finch sneered, his eyes wild with bloodlust. He saw Alara, her face smudged with soot, a rifle in her hand. His sneer turned into a predatory smile. And you, my dear, look at you, playing pioneer. Did you really think you could escape me? I own you. I own this mountain. I own everything you see. Jedediah moved, placing himself between Finch and Alara, a human shield. You own nothing, Finch, he growled, his voice low and deadly. You are just a thief and a murderer. Brave words for a dead man, Finch spat. He raised his pistol, aiming it squarely at Jedediah's chest. He was a physical coward, but with the advantage of numbers and a gun aimed at a one-armed man, he was drunk on his own power. He was monologuing, savoring his victory. It was the mistake Jedediah had been waiting for. With a speed that was terrifying to behold, Jedediah dropped his rifle and drew the massive Bowie knife from his belt. In the same motion, he lunged, not at Finch, but to the side, grabbing the edge of the heavy oak table and flipping it on its side. It was a desperate, brilliant move, providing a moment of cover. Finch, startled, fired, his shot going wild and burying itself in the ceiling. In that split second of confusion, Alara acted. She did not think. She reacted. As Jedediah engaged the two henchmen who rushed forward, his knife a whirlwind of silver, Alara raised her Winchester. She did not aim for the henchman. She aimed for the true monster, Bartholomew Finch. He saw her. His eyes widened in disbelief, his mouth opening to shout a command or a curse. He tried to bring his pistol to bear on her, but she was faster. She had found the stillness inside the storm. She saw his face, the face that had haunted her nightmares. The face of the man who had murdered her husband, who had tried to steal her sister's future. She saw the doe, cornered by wolves. She saw Jedediah, standing as a shield. She squeezed the trigger. The shot was clean. It struck Finch squarely in the chest. The arrogant smirk on his face was replaced by a look of profound, stupid surprise. He looked down at the blossoming red flower on his pristine white shirt, then back up at her. He took a stumbling step back, his silver pistol falling from his limp fingers, and then he collapsed, a puppet with its strings cut. The remaining henchmen, their paymaster dead, their leader a one-armed whirlwind of fury who had already dispatched two of their number, lost their nerve. They were hired guns, not fanatics. They broke and ran, melting back into the trees, leaving the smoking cabin and the bodies of their comrades behind. Silence descended, broken only by the crackle of the flames and the ragged sound of Alara's own breathing. She stood in the center of the room, the Winchester still raised, smoke curling from its barrel. Jedediah was leaning against the wall, breathing heavily, his arm bleeding from a long gash, but otherwise unharmed. His eyes were on her, and they were filled with a look of awe and something else, something so profound and raw it made her heart ache. The immediate threat was gone, but the fire was not. Working together, they used the buckets of water and snow from the porch to douse the flames, which had thankfully not yet taken a strong hold on the main structure. They worked in a grim, exhausted silence, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the sickening, coppery smell of blood. When the last ember was extinguished, they stood in the middle of their ravaged home. The door was destroyed, the walls were scorched and bullet-riddled, and the bodies of their enemies lay where they had fallen. But they were alive. They had won. Alara dropped the rifle, her strength finally giving out. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, burying her face in her hands as the full weight of what she had done, what they had been through, washed over her. A sob, raw and ragged, escaped her throat. She had taken a life. She had killed a man. The thought was horrifying, but beneath it, there was no regret. Only a grim, stark sense of justice. A gentle touch on her shoulder made her look up. Jedediah was kneeling in front of her, his face streaked with soot, his expression impossibly tender. He reached out and gently brushed the tear from her cheek with his thumb. He did not speak. He did not need to. His eyes said everything. He pulled her into a one-armed embrace, holding her tightly against his solid chest as she cried, her sobs turning from grief to relief. He held her until the shaking stopped, his presence a warm, solid anchor in the chaotic aftermath. "Lily," she whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. He helped her to her feet. Together, they moved the bare pelt and lifted the heavy trapdoor. A small, frightened face peered up at them from the darkness. "Is it over?" Lily whispered. "It's over," Alara said, her voice choked with emotion. "We're safe." Jedediah reached down and lifted the little girl out of the cellar, holding her close. Lily wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder, her small body trembling. For a long moment, the three of them stood there, a strange, battered, but unbroken family unit in the ruins of their home. The days that followed were a blur of hard work and quiet healing. Jedediah, with a grim efficiency, dealt with the grim task of burying the dead, choosing a spot far from the cabin. He said little about it, but Alara saw the somber weight it placed upon him. The corrupt lawmen and their dead master would not be missed, and no one would come looking for them on this mountain. Their disappearance would simply become another one of the wild, fearful legends that the people of Providence told about the beast of Obsidian Peak. Together, Alara and Jedediah began to rebuild. He was a master craftsman, and with her help, they repaired the scorched wall, built a new, stronger door, and patched the bullet holes. The work was physically demanding, but it was a balm to their souls. With every plank they sawed, with every nail they hammered, they were not just repairing a cabin, they were building a future. They were reclaiming their sanctuary, making it their own, sealing it with their shared labor and blood. The legal matters resolved themselves with a brutal simplicity. With Finch dead, his empire of debt and fear crumbled. The hired judge from 3 counties over quietly rescinded the fraudulent land claim, fearing the exposure of his own corruption. The deed to Thomas's land, which Finch had held, was found among his papers, and Dr. Albright, in a final act of conscience, saw to it that it was quietly returned to Alara's name. She was free. The land was hers again, though she had no desire to return to it. Her home was here now. As the last of the snow melted from the high passes and the first green shoots of spring began to poke through the damp earth, a new tension settled over the cabin. The external threat was gone, replaced by an internal one. The crossroads. Jedediah grew quieter, more distant. He spent more time away from the cabin, checking his trap lines, disappearing into the woods for hours on end. He was a man accustomed to solitude, a lone wolf. He had fought to protect them, had fulfilled his duty as he saw it. But what now? He was not a husband, not a father. He was a mountain man, and Alara could feel him preparing to retreat back into the wilderness that was his true home, leaving them in the safety he had won for them. The thought was a cold stone in her stomach. She could not bear it. She had not survived the blizzard, the gunman, and Bartholomew Finch only to lose the one thing that had come to matter more than anything else. One evening, she found him on the porch, staring out at the sunset, painting the peaks in hues of gold and rose. He was sharpening his knife on a whetstone, the rhythmic, scraping sound the only noise in the twilight. His bag was packed and sitting by the door. A clean shirt, a new pair of moccasins she had made for him, a small pouch of her bread. He was preparing to leave. "Are you leaving?" she asked, her voice quiet, but steady. She would not plead. She would not beg. She had learned to be stronger than that. He did not stop his work. "The passes are clear," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It is safe for you and the girl now. You have the deed to your land. You can go back, or you can sell it and go to Fortitude. You can start over." "I don't want to start over," she said, stepping onto the porch to stand beside him. "I have already started over. Here, with you." He finally stopped, setting the knife and stone aside. He looked out at the mountains, his jaw tight. "Alara, I am not the man you think I am. I am not a husband. I am not a farmer. I am this." He gestured to the vast, empty wilderness. "This is all I know. I have brought you nothing but violence and death." "You are wrong," she said fiercely, her hand closing over his. His hand, the one that could fell a tree or kill a man, was warm and steady beneath hers. "You brought me life. You took me in when the world threw me away. You taught me to be strong. You showed me what honor and courage look like. You gave me back my future." She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. This was her final battle, the most important one. "Lily adores you. She follows you around like a little shadow. She has not smiled like this since before her father, since before." She moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "And me," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You have ruined me for any other man, Jedediah Stone. You have shown me a partnership I never dreamed of, a strength I never knew I had. I do not want to go back to the world below. I do not want the farm. I want this." She placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. "I want this home. I want this life. With you." She searched his face, his beautiful, scarred, stoic face. "Please, Jedediah, stay, or let us stay. With you." He stared at her, his gray eyes stormy with 1,000 emotions. He was a man of few words, a man who expressed himself in deeds, not declarations. He had lived his life in a fortress of solitude, and she was asking him to tear down the walls, to let her and her sister in, permanently. It was the most terrifying thing anyone had ever asked of him. More terrifying than the bear, more terrifying than Finch's guns. He looked past her, into the cabin. Through the open door, he could see Lily, sitting by the fire, carefully arranging her menagerie of wooden animals. She was humming a small, happy tune. He looked back at Alara, at her fierce, hopeful, beautiful face, her eyes shining with unshed tears. He saw the woman who had faced down a blizzard, who had stood against a dozen gunmen, who had killed her own monster to protect her family. His family. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. A ghost of a smile, a real one this time, touched his lips. It transformed his harsh features, making him look younger, almost boyish. "The spring planting needs to be done," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "The roof still needs patching on the north side. And Lily's bough is too small for her now. She will need a new 1-inch. Tears of joy welled in Alara's eyes, spilling down her cheeks. It was not a declaration of love in the way the poets wrote about, but it was more real, more solid than any pretty words. It was a commitment. It was a list of tasks for a shared future. It was a promise. It was yes. Yes, she breathed, a laugh and a sob catching in her throat. Yes, it does. He lowered his head, and his lips met hers. The kiss was not gentle or tentative. It was fierce and hungry, and full of all the unspoken words, the shared battles, the pain, and the hope that had passed between them. It was the kiss of a man who had been starved for a lifetime, who had finally come home. It was a promise sealed, a new beginning forged in the heart of the wild. The sun dipped below the jagged peaks, but for the first time, the coming darkness held no fear for Jedediah Stone. He held his future in his arm, his family was safe inside, and his home was no longer a fortress of solitude, but a sanctuary of love. The one-armed beast of Obsidian Peak was no more. In his place stood a husband and a father. And as he held Alara, he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was only the beginning. The world below had thought him a monster, a joke. They did not know that with this woman by his side, this fierce, resilient phoenix, he could build more than just a life. He could build an empire, a legacy carved not out of fear and greed, but out of love, honor, and the unyielding strength of the mountain itself. The biggest outfit in the West would not be built on land or cattle alone, but on the unbreakable foundation of the family he had found in the heart of a blizzard.